From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
You always have to be prepared to walk. I could have signed an agreement today, and then you people would have said, oh, what a terrible deal, what a terrible thing he did. No, you have to be prepared to walk.
A historic summit to denuclearize the Korean peninsula ends without an agreement, President Trump abruptly walking away after Kim Jong-un demanded the U.S. lift sanctions on his country. We'll go to the site of the summit, Hanoi, Vietnam, for the latest. Then President Trump's former personal attorney and fixer, Michael Cohen, testifies on Capitol Hill for more than 5 hours, directly accusing Trump of committing crimes before and after he became president.
I am ashamed that I chose to take part in concealing Mr. Trump's illicit acts rather than listening to my own conscience. I am ashamed because I know what Mr. Trump is. He is a racist, he is a con man, and he is a cheat.
All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. In the Vietnamese capital of Hanoi, talks between President Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un came to an abrupt end Thursday after Trump walked out of the talks aimed at reaching a denuclearization agreement. Their second summit fell apart over Kim Jong-un's demand the U.S. lift all sanctions on North Korea in exchange for the closure of one nuclear facility. This is President Trump speaking at a news conference before he left.
Basically, they wanted the sanctions lifted in their entirety, and we couldn't do that. They were willing to denuke a large portion of the areas that we wanted, but we couldn't give up all of the sanctions for that. So we continue to work, and we'll see, but we had to walk away from that particular suggestion. We had to walk away from that.
The summit's collapse comes just days after House Democrats introduced a resolution to formally end the Korean War after nearly 70 years of conflict. After headlines, we'll go to Hanoi to speak with Christine Ahn, founder and executive director of Women Cross DMZ, a global movement of women mobilizing to end the Korean War. On Capitol Hill, President Trump's former personal attorney, Michael Cohen, accused his ex-boss of committing multiple criminal acts before and after he became president during more than 5 hours of explosive public testimony before the House Oversight Committee on Wednesday. Cohen testified Trump had asked him to pay $130,000 in hush money in violation of campaign finance laws to adult film star Stormy Daniels just weeks before the 2016 election, offering as evidence a copy of a $35,000 reimbursement check he said Trump wrote to him in 2017 after Trump became president. Cohen also claimed Trump had advance knowledge that WikiLeaks was preparing to publish a trove of emails to hurt Hillary Clinton's campaign. Cohen also confirmed the president repeatedly checked in about the status of a proposed Trump Tower Moscow project well into the 2016 campaign, despite his public claims to the contrary. Cohen's testimony came 2 months before he's scheduled to begin a 3-year prison sentence for lying to Congress, a series of financial crimes and campaign violations. Cohen told Congress he was ashamed of his own failings.
I am ashamed that I chose to take part in concealing Mr. Trump's illicit acts rather than listening to my own conscience. I am ashamed because I know what Mr. Trump is. He is a racist, he is a con man, and he is a cheat.
Cohen is scheduled to testify behind closed doors today to the House Intelligence Committee. It will be the third day of his testimony, public and private. We'll have much more on Michael Cohen's historic testimony to Congress later in the broadcast. Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan said Thursday he'll return a captured fighter pilot to India after Pakistan's military shot down 2 fighter jets that entered into its airspace. Khan's gesture is aimed at de-escalating tensions between the nuclear-armed neighbors after India carried out airstrikes inside Pakistan Tuesday for the first time since 1971. The fighting has stoked fears of a nuclear exchange and has stranded thousands of travelers after Pakistan Pakistan closed its airspace to all domestic and international flights. Russia warned Wednesday it's prepared to build a new generation of nuclear-capable missiles if the U.S. deploys similar weapons in Russia. This is Russia's Deputy Representative for Disarmament speaking at a United Nations forum in Geneva Wednesday.
What is important here is that in its tactical and technical features, in particular the flight time from the command center, our weapons would correspond to the threat directed against Russia. We know how to do this, and we would implement these plans immediately as soon as such a threat would become a reality.
This month, the Trump administration formally announced it's withdrawing from the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, the INF, the landmark 1987 treaty banning all nuclear and non-nuclear missiles with short and medium ranges, negotiated between Reagan and Gorbachev. Venezuelan opposition leader Juan Guaido has arrived in Brasilia for talks with Brazil's far-right president, Jair Bolsonaro. Last month, Bolsonaro joined President Trump and many Latin American heads of state in recognizing Guaido as Venezuela's interim leader. Venezuela's president, Nicolás Maduro, has called Bolsonaro a modern-day Hitler and has accused him of plotting a military intervention in Venezuela. Juan Guaido's trip to Brazil came as Venezuela's foreign minister told a UN body in Geneva Wednesday the United States is plotting to overthrow Venezuela's government. Speaking at the UN Human Rights Council, Jorge Ariaza accused the Trump administration of weaponizing humanitarian aid, even as the U.S. has frozen tens of billions of dollars worth of Venezuelan assets. Ariaza also said President Donald Trump should negotiate directly with President Maduro.
Again, we are calling for dialogue with the United States. Yes, why not? Between President Maduro and President Trump. Why shouldn't they meet? So that they could try to find common ground and explain their differences.
To see our recent interviews with the Venezuelan Foreign Minister Jorge Ariaza, visit our website at democracynow.org. President Trump's son-in-law and senior White House advisor Jared Kushner met with Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman Tuesday for the first time since the assassination of Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi. A White House statement on Kushner's closed-door meeting with the prince in the Saudi capital Riyadh made no mention of Khashoggi, nor of the U.S.-backed Saudi-led war in Yemen, which has sparked the world's worst humanitarian crisis in a half-century. The White House said the talks were aimed at increasing cooperation between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia. The State Department has said it will not intervene in the case of a Saudi man accused of killing a 15-year-old American student in a hit-and-run in Portland, Oregon. The suspect, Abdurrahman Samir Noura, is said to have fled the United States back to Saudi Arabia with the help of Saudi officials who reportedly helped him obtain a fake passport in order to fly him out of the U.S. It's believed to be one of several similar cases of Saudi nationals accused of crimes being spirited out of the U.S. To see our interview with Shane Dixon Kavanaugh, the Oregonian reporter who broke the story, go to democracynow.org. Back on Capitol Hill, the House of Representatives approved a bill Wednesday that would expand a federal system of background checks on firearms purchases. The bill passed in a vote of 240 to 190 with the support of just 8 Republicans. The House is poised to vote on a second bill today that would extend the review period for background checks from 3 days to 10. The bills are the first major pieces of gun control legislation to advance on Capitol Hill since before the Sandy Hook school massacre in 2012. But they appear unlikely to advance in the Republican-controlled Senate, and the White House has signaled it'll veto the bills. House Democrats unveiled a bill Wednesday to dramatically revamp the U.S. healthcare system. This is the bill's chief sponsor, Congressmember Pramila Jayapal of Washington.
It is time to ensure that health care is a right and not a privilege, guaranteed to every person in our country. It is time for Medicare for all.
Congressman House-member Jayapal's Medicare for All bill has over 100 co-sponsors. It would expand Medicare to include dental, vision, and long-term care, while making the federally run health program available to all Americans. It would eliminate health insurance premiums, co-payments, and deductibles, while changing how health care providers are paid. Robert Weissman, president of Public Citizen, says the legislation would eliminate nearly $500 billion in waste spent annually on bureaucracy, inefficiency, and excessive corporate profits. In North Carolina, a former paid consultant for Republican congressional candidate Mark Harris was arrested Wednesday, charged with ordering workers to illegally fill out and mail in other people's absentee ballots ahead of last November's congressional election. Leslie McCrae-Dowless also faces felony charges of obstruction of justice. He's accused of rigging the election in North Carolina's 9th District to tilt the vote in favor of Harris, who was initially declared the winner in that close congressional race in November. Last week, the North Carolina State Board of Elections vacated the results and ordered a new election. On Tuesday, Mark Harris said he will not run in a new election for the seat, citing his ailing health, not voter fraud, for his decision. His former opponent, Democrat Dan McCready, says he will run again. Prosecutors say Mark Harris could still face criminal charges over the vote-rigging scandal. In Texas, a federal judge has barred state election officials from carrying out a purge of voting rolls that could have seen thousands of naturalized citizens wrongfully barred from voting in the next election. Wednesday's order by the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Texas comes a month after Texas Secretary of State flagged the names of nearly 100,000 registered voters who declared they were not U.S. citizens when obtaining a driver's license. Civil rights groups say most, if not all, of those flagged were later naturalized, and that the Republican-led effort to purge voter rolls was aimed at suppressing the vote of Latinos in Texas. The Senate has ended debate on whether to confirm Andrew Wheeler as head of the Environmental Protection Agency, setting up a final vote on the former coal industry lobbyist today. On Wednesday, Maine Republican Senator Susan Collins said she would vote no on Wheeler's confirmation, citing his efforts to roll back greenhouse gas emission standards and his assault on regulations limiting mercury emissions from coal-fired power plants. Wheeler appears to have the support of the remaining 52 senators who comprise the Republican majority. Wheeler's been the acting head of the EPA since Scott Pruitt resigned in July amidst an onslaught of financial and ethics scandals. And in London, police arrested 9 climate activists Wednesday as they nonviolently blocked the entrance to a hotel where a petroleum industry conference was underway. Some of the activists superglued themselves to the hotel's windows and doors, forcing police to spend about 2 hours removing them as the International Petroleum Week conference met inside. In a statement, activist Sam Knights of the group Extinction Rebellion said, quote, "These companies are destroying our planet. We have to start talking about that. We have to start pointing out again and again that their business model is based on the mass murder of hundreds and millions of people." And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We begin today's show in Hanoi, Vietnam, where talks between President Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un came to an abrupt end Thursday after the leaders failed to reach a denuclearization agreement. Their second summit meeting fell apart over Kim Jong-un's demand the U.S. lift all sanctions on North Korea. This is President Trump speaking at a news conference with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo.
I could have done a deal today, but it would have been a deal that wouldn't have been a deal that would have been something that I wouldn't have been happy about. Mike would not have been happy about. We had some pretty big options, but we just felt it wasn't appropriate, and we really want to do it right.
Trump said Kim had demanded sanctions be lifted in exchange for dismantling the Yongbyon enrichment facility, an important North Korean nuclear site. During the news press conference, Trump was questioned by David Sanger of The New York Times.
So can you just give us a little more detail? Did you get into the question of actually dismantling the Yongbyon complex?
Yes, absolutely.
And does he seem willing ultimately to take all of that out?
Sure, totally.
He does. He just wants all the sanctions off first.
He would do that, but he wants the sanctions for that. And as you know, there's plenty left after that. And I just felt it wasn't good. Mike and I spent a long time negotiating and talking about it to ourselves. And I felt that particular, as you know, that facility, while very big, it wasn't enough to do what we were doing.
So he was willing to do Yongbyon, but you wanted more than that, I assume?
We had to have more than that, yeah. We had to have more than that. Because there are other things that you haven't talked about, that you haven't written about, that we found, and we have to have. That was done a long time ago, but the people didn't know about.
Including the uranium, including the second uranium enrichment plant.
Exactly. And we brought many, many points up that I think they were surprised that we knew. But we had to do more than just the one level, because if we did the one level and we gave up all of that leverage, it's been taking a long time to build.
So I want to take. He was not willing to take out that second.
David, I want to take off the sanctions so badly because I want that country to grow. That country has got such potential, but they have to give up more. We could have done that deal.
The working lunch was canceled between the two leaders. The summit's collapse comes just days after House Democrats introduced a resolution to end the Korean War after nearly 70 years of conflict. Democratic Congressmember Ro Khanna, who introduced the resolution, said in a statement, historic engagement between South and North Korea has created a once-in-a-generation opportunity to formally end this war. President Trump must not squander this rare chance for peace, he said. Well, for more, we turn to Christine Ahn, founder and executive director of Women Cross DMZ, a global movement of women mobilizing to end the Korean War. She's in Hanoi, Vietnam, for the summit. Welcome to Democracy Now!, Christine. Can you respond to the collapse of the summit?
Hi, Amy. Well, it's obviously a very sad day for 80 million Korean people around the world, especially on the peninsula, as we've been long waiting 67 years for the U.S. and North Korea to declare an end to the Korean War. And many people, many pundits, I think President Moon, were expecting a breakthrough today, including things such as the establishment of opening liaison offices in Washington and in Pyongyang. So the sudden decision to cut short the meeting, to, basically shut down the talks, and it came as a sudden surprise. And the mood, which started out celebratory, was soon overshadowed by the sudden decision. And the announcement that Trump made that North Korea was demanding the full lifting of sanctions. And so, I want to first start by saying, we don't know what the full picture is. And in fact, there have been now some reports coming out, especially from South Korea. The former Minister of Unification is suggesting that Bolton, of course, once we saw the picture of the table and we saw Pompeo and we saw Bolton, that was a red flag that something was going to be derailed. And so what we understand from the South Korean side is that Bolton was insisting that biological and chemical weapons were to be part of the package. And so North Korea obviously shifted their position and called for full lifting of sanctions. So we don't know what the full picture is. We obviously have to hear from the North Korean side, but I wouldn't just quickly take Trump's line that North Korea was asking for something that was unreasonable, because clearly a lot of work had been done. I think Stephen Biegun, who is the special representative and envoy, clearly spent a lot of time. He gave a speech at Stanford a few weeks ago. It was perhaps one of the most thoughtful, comprehensive understanding of the situation, and it seemed as if we were on the brink of a diplomatic breakthrough.
Let's go back to President Trump speaking earlier today.
The inspections on North Korea will take place, and if we do something with them, we have a schedule set up that is very good. We know things that, as David was asking about certain places and certain sites, there are sites that people don't know about that we know about. We would be able to do inspections, we think, very, very successfully.
Interesting, Christine. President Trump was not extremely critical of the North Korean leader. He was not being defiant. He got some help from Sean Hannity, who was in the audience, almost reminding him saying something along the lines of President Trump, you know, of course, President Reagan walked away at Reykjavik, and that was just a strategy, he said. But your thoughts on where you think this will head? President Trump saying maybe they'll meet again soon, or maybe it'll be a very long time from now.
Well, I mean, there are two things that give me hope in this current moment. One is, I mean, actually the rapport, if you actually see the rapport that Trump and Kim have established, I mean, you need the leaders of the two countries to have good rapport. And clearly there is something there. And, you know, the fact that Trump said two things in his press conference really surprised me. One was he put a dollar bill, the amount, a price tag, on the U.S. war drills. He said they cost $100 million. It's a huge waste of money. The other thing he said was that the sanctions harm the people of North Korea and that he wouldn't be adding more new sanctions. I think that's a great outcome. It's a great foundation, but we need to continue to build on it. We need to push for it. The other thing that obviously gives me hope is that the peace, the historic peace that's taking place between North and South Korea, the Korean people want an end to this Korean War. 9 out of 10 South Koreans want a declaration to the end of the war. They have made tremendous progress. So one of the key outcomes we were hoping for was the lifting of sanctions that are definitely getting in the way of inter-Korean economic progress. And so I think that we have to take it to the international court. We have to take it to the world of public opinion. Sanctions is not some kind of sterile thing. This is something that is having a daily impact on the lives of North Korean people. 60,000 North Korean children could starve as a result of sanctions. We've heard the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights say that the sanctions are impacting the day-to-day life of North Korean people. You know, this is not just a game of politics. This is a game of people's lives. This is not a game. And I think that there's an urgency, not just for the people that are living in North Korea, but think about the people of the Korean Peninsula, where they have lived for 70 years of a constant threat of war breaking out, intentionally or accidentally. This is not a game, and this is a moment where the international community must put pressure, whether at the UN level, and put pressure on the countries that have been siding with the United States and say, this is enough. This is enough. Korea wants peace, and the international community has a responsibility to support it.
Christine Ahn, can you talk about the role of South Korea's president, Moon Jae-in, in facilitating the North Korea-U.S. negotiations?
I mean, he's been absolutely essential. And the good news is that Trump asked his support after he left today, that he really wanted his support and, you know, continuing to play this facilitating role. But, you know, we would not be in this place were it not the incredibly effective diplomacy by President Moon. And, you know, we have to take a hard look at what is a true alliance. And is it alliance of the military? Is it alliance of the corporations? Or is it alliance of the people? And if the people of South Korea are asking the American people to support this historic peace, that won't happen for another lifetime. And the stars are aligned right now. And so I speak with, you know, having worked on this issue for most of my adult life, we are not going to have this opportunity. And so that's why another thing that gives me hope is that Congressman Ro Khanna, Andy Kim, the first Korean-American Democrat, and several women congresswomen, including Barbara Lee, including Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Jan Schakowsky, they have all stepped forward to introduce this congressional resolution calling for an end to the Korean War and urging the president to establish a process towards the signing of a peace agreement. We're not going to get to denuclearization. We're not going to get to the improvement of human rights until we get to peace. And, you know, declaring an end to the Korean War was going to be a first step, but it's not enough. It's not a legally binding agreement, and we need to push for this. And as I wrote in an op-ed with Gloria Steinem in the Washington Post, The Korean War is America's oldest war. It inaugurated the military-industrial complex. It set forth the U.S. foreign policy to be the world's military police. I don't think Americans want that anymore. And we have this historic opportunity to end America's oldest war. We have a U.S. Congress that is the most representative ever of the American population, and we have the greatest number of women in Congress right now. This is the moment now to push for this war. It's not just a symbolic thing, but think about, I live in Hawaii, where there's the U.S. Pacific Command. Think about how much is invested in preparation for war with North Korea. Clearly, there's China behind that, but think about what we can do. We'll never be able to achieve the bold vision for Medicare for all or free college tuition or new Green Deal unless we tackle the $700 billion budget that is currently being invested. And North Korea is the greatest, allegedly the greatest U.S. foreign policy challenge. We have a golden opportunity. The Korean people want peace. It's time for the American people to stand up with them and urge the president. And if not, and if President Trump is not movable, then we have to try the U.S. government, and that's where Congress has a role to play, not just to authorize war, but they have a role to declare peace.
Christine Ahn, you were among hundreds of women who wrote a letter jointly to Donald Trump and to Kim Jong-un calling for peace and saying peace women should be at the table. Can you explain?
Absolutely. I mean, I think right now the fragility of the talks shows that we have to democratize this process. We can't leave it just in the hands of Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un. It needs to have it's not just a war, a 70-year war between the leaders of the two countries. We have had generations of propaganda. We've always seen North Korea through a prism of war. And we need to have people-to-people engagement. That is what's going to bring genuine peace. And we know that when women are included in the peace process, it leads to a peace agreement. And not just a peace agreement, but a really durable one. And when half the world's population isn't part of shaping a peace agreement that reflects the desire of half the world's population, it's not going to obviously be a just and sustainable one. So we're demanding that there is a process that includes civil society and that includes women's rights groups, because we have seen the record in 40 conflicts around the world. In all but one case, when women's groups were involved in the peace process, it led to a peace agreement. And we want to see denuclearization. We want to see peace. We want to see the improvement of human rights. We'll never get there until there is a true peace, until war is taken off the table.
Christine, finally, I want to ask about Otto Warmbier, the American student who was imprisoned for more than 17 months for trying to steal a propaganda sign in a North Korean hotel. Died in June 2017, a week after he was released from a North Korean prison and returned to the U.S. in a coma. When Trump was asked if he discussed Warmbier with Kim Jong-un at the Hanoi news conference, Trump said, quote, "He tells me he didn't know about it, and I will take him at his word. Those prisons are rough. They're rough places, and bad things happen, but I don't believe he knew about it," he said. Your response?
Well, I believe that it's very possible that Kim Jong-un wouldn't know, and that perhaps those that were overseeing Otto Warmbier's condition didn't know what to do when, you know, if what they're saying is that he fell into a coma and that they didn't have the proper medical ability to treat him. But what we do know is that when he returned, when his body was returned back to the United States, the doctor that received him basically did a full examination. And she basically held a press conference after the Warmbiers did and said, "I examined his body. And this is not the sign of, there wasn't torture. In fact, you know, for his condition, he was he was very well taken care of." And that, unfortunately, there was a really great piece. I think it was in GQ, because the author couldn't find it, could find another publication. But people should read that. It's an incredibly insightful view into the complexity of what took place. But I think that's a really important point that is obscured in the media and definitely hidden, is that the doctor that received him had a completely different narrative about the condition when he returned to the United States.
I mean, it was a
tragic situation. And
there was a question of why he was held at all for that length of time.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you know, it's an absurd thing. North Korea should have released him. There was no reason to do that. But I think, you know, it's back to the issue of North Korea, and the situation on the Korean Peninsula is one of a state of war. And North Korea is a garrison state. It is in a siege mentality. And if we want to see progress towards that, isolating them, doing aggressive military exercises, you know, conducting sanctions, you know, that prevent the development of the economy. I mean, we look at, you know, the UN Security Council sanctions, for example, you know, bans exports of textiles. I mean, who do you think works at these textile factories but women? And so we know that when women have access to the resources, when they control the purse, that the conditions of their families and their communities improve. So how are we not seeing this broader geopolitical context of the conditions in North Korea? We have to say we have some culpability in this.
Christine Ahn, I want to thank you very much for being with us, founder and executive director of Women Cross DMZ, a global movement of women mobilizing to end the Korean War, speaking to us from Hanoi, Vietnam, where the U.S.-North Korea summit has broken down. President Trump has left. But we'll continue, of course, to cover this story. And we'll link to the joint letter to both leaders from hundreds of women around the world calling for an end to the Korean War. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, highlights from the testimony on Capitol Hill yesterday of Michael Cohen. Stay with us.
You don't own me. I'm not just one of your many toys. You don't own me. Don't say I can't go with other boys. And don't tell me what to do. Don't tell me what to say. And please, when I go out with you, don't put me on display. You don't own me. Don't try to change me in any way. You don't own me. Don't tie me down, 'cause I'll never stay.
You Don't Own Me, sung by Joan Jett. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman. President Trump's former personal attorney and fixer, Michael Cohen, has accused his old boss of committing multiple criminal acts before and after he became president. Cohen made the charges during more than 5 hours of explosive public testimony on Capitol Hill Wednesday. He provided evidence that Trump had violated campaign finance laws by paying hush money to women. He accused the Trump Foundation of committing fraud by using the tax-exempt organization for personal purposes. Cohen said Trump lied when he said he couldn't release his tax returns because they were being audited. He said Trump routinely deflated his assets to reduce his taxes while inflating them in order to win bank loans. Cohen claimed Trump had advance knowledge that WikiLeaks was preparing to publish a trove of emails to hurt Hillary Clinton's campaign. Cohen also confirmed the president repeatedly checked in about the status of a proposed Trump Tower Moscow project well into the 2016 campaign, despite his public claims to the contrary. But Michael Cohen said he had seen no direct evidence that Trump had colluded with Russia during the 2006 campaign. Cohen also said he fears there would not be a peaceful transition of power if Trump loses the 2020 election. Michael Cohen's testimony came 2 months before he's scheduled to begin a 3-year prison sentence for lying to Congress a series of financial crimes and campaign violations. Cohen told Congress he was ashamed of his own failings.
Never in a million years did I imagine, when I accepted a job in 2007 to work for Donald Trump, that he would one day run for the presidency, to launch a campaign on a platform of hate and intolerance, and actively win. I regret the day I said yes to Mr. Trump. I regret all the help and support I gave him along the way. I am ashamed of my own failings and publicly accepted responsibility for them by pleading guilty in the Southern District of New York. I am ashamed of my weakness and my misplaced loyalty, of the things I did for Mr. Trump in an effort to protect and promote him. I am ashamed that I chose to take part in concealing Mr. Trump's illicit acts rather than listening to my own conscience. I am ashamed because I know what Mr. Trump is. He is a racist, he is a con man, and he is a cheat. He was a presidential candidate who knew that Roger Stone was talking with Julian Assange about a WikiLeaks drop on Democratic National Committee emails.
Michael Cohen accused President Trump of repeatedly lying during the 2016 campaign when he said he had no dealings with Russia.
There were at least a half a dozen times between the Iowa caucus in January of 2016 and the end of June when he would ask me, "How's it going in Russia?" referring to the Moscow Tower project. You need to know that Mr. Trump's personal lawyers reviewed and edited my statement to Congress about the timing of the Moscow Tower negotiations before I gave it. So to be clear, Mr. Trump knew of and directed the Trump-Moscow negotiations throughout the campaign and lied about it. He lied about it because he never expected to win. He also lied about it because he stood to make hundreds of millions of dollars on the Moscow real estate project. And so I lied about it too, because Mr. Trump had made clear to me, through his personal statements to me, that we both knew to be false, and through his lies to the country, that he wanted me to lie. And he made it clear to me because his personal attorneys reviewed my statement before I gave it to Congress.
Michael Cohen also revealed new details about how President Trump, as well as his son Don Jr., signed checks to him to reimburse him for the hush money he paid to adult film star Stormy Daniels, who alleged she had an affair with Trump.
As Exhibit 5A to my testimony shows, I am providing a copy of a $35,000 check that President Trump personally signed from his personal bank account on August 1st of 2017, when he was President of the United States, pursuant to the cover-up, which was the basis of my guilty plea, to reimburse me, the word used by Mr. Trump's TV lawyer, for the illegal hush money I paid on his behalf. This $35,000 check was one of 11 check installments that was paid throughout the year while he was president. Other checks to reimburse me for the hush money payments were signed by Donald Trump Jr. and Alan Weisselberg. And see for example 5B. The President of the United States thus wrote a personal check for the payment of hush money as part of a criminal scheme to violate campaign finance laws. And you can find the details of that scheme directed by Mr. Trump in the pleadings in the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York.
So that was Trump's former lawyer, Michael Cohen, testifying in front of Congress Wednesday. For more, we're joined by Marcy Wheeler, independent journalist who covers national security and civil liberties. She runs the website emptywheel.net. Marcy, welcome to Democracy Now! Overall respond as you tweeted up a storm yesterday following every line. What you thought was most important about this explosive 5 hours before the House Oversight and Reform Committee?
Well, it's kind of overwhelming because, you know, there are additional details of financial fraud that you weren't even able to hit on because there was so much there. I think what was most surprising is that Cohen came off more credibly than certainly the Republicans who were trying to damage his credibility. Yeah, is he still a thuggish liar? Yeah, do we all know what a creep he was during 2016? Absolutely. Yeah, was yesterday a performance? Absolutely. But did he come off at least credibly enough to make what he was saying about Trump generally seem true? And I think he did.
And what was most significant, do you think, about what he revealed? What President Trump pointed out in Vietnam at his news conference, clearly very engaged in this. I don't know if that's why he ended the summit abruptly, but said the important thing to bring out, he said, although he considers him a liar, is that he said there was no collusion.
What Cohen actually said is that he himself didn't have direct evidence. A lot of people note that this means the entire Steele dossier is debunked, which is not surprising. I've been challenging that for a long time. What he said was he suspected it and talked particularly about a weird interchange between Don Jr. and his father sometime in June of 2016, where Don Jr. came up, walked behind Trump's desk and said, blah, 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 the meeting, and Trump, kind of assented to that and said,
let's
good,
go
let me know.
to Michael Cohen, who said Donald Trump knew about the WikiLeaks release of Hillary Clinton's emails before it happened.
A lot of people have asked me about whether Mr. Trump knew about the release of the hacked documents, the Democratic National Committee emails, ahead of time. And the answer is yes. As I earlier stated, Mr. Trump knew from Roger Stone in advance about the WikiLeaks drop of emails. In July of 2016, days before the Democratic convention, I was in Mr. Trump's office when his secretary announced that Roger Stone was on the phone. Mr. Trump put Mr. Stone on the speakerphone. Mr. Stone told Mr. Trump that he had just gotten off the phone with Julian Assange, and that Mr. Assange told Mr. Stone that within a couple of days, there would be a massive dump of emails that would damage Hillary Clinton's campaign. Mr. Trump responded by stating to the effect, "Wouldn't that be great?"
Later in the hearing, Republican Congressmember Thomas Massie of Kentucky questioned Michael Cohen.
You said, and this is also in your testimony, in the days before the Democratic convention, you became privy to a conversation that some of Hillary Clinton's emails would be leaked. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Was that in, you said late July? Do you know the exact day?
I believe it was either the 18th or the 19th, and I would guess that it would be on the 19th.
But it was definitely July?
I believe so, yes.
Do you know that was public knowledge in June? This was Mr. Assange, and I'd like to submit this, unanimous consent to submit this for the record.
Without objection. So
Mr. Assange reported to the media on June 12th that those emails would be leaked. So I'm not saying you have fake news. I'm saying you have old news, and there's really not much to that.
Marcy Wheeler, he's saying that a lot of people knew that Julian Assange had said it publicly.
Julian Assange said publicly that he had material on Hillary Clinton. What Julian Assange never said publicly is, I'm going to drop it at the beginning of the DNC. And so what is interesting about Cohen's story, and to be clear, it's unlikely that he really did speak directly with Julian Assange. We know from a bunch of Stone's other claims that when he claimed to be speaking directly with Assange, he instead was speaking with a cutout like Jerome Corsi or like Randy Credico. But what it appears happened is that Stone informed Trump precisely when the emails were going to be dropped. And that, as far as I know, is not something that has been made public before, and is particularly interesting because if the call happened on July 19th, Stone was meeting with Nigel Farage at the RNC that day, and he's one of the people that it was clear Mueller seemed interested in finding out whether was a goad between people in the UK who knew about the emails and Roger Stone. So it is new information. It's consistent with Roger Stone's indictment, although it means in the indictment Mueller is referring to the president himself as a senior campaign official. It's more specific than we had ever known before.
We're going to break 30 seconds, come back, and hear Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's line of questioning for Michael Cohen. Stay with us.
Take me, dance with me. I want to be everything
will be a good boy by Gang of Four. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. As we go now to New York Democratic Congressmember Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez questioning Michael Cohen at yesterday's House hearing.
My colleague from Vermont had asked you several questions about AMI, the parent company of the National Enquirer. And in that, you mentioned a treasure trove, a quote, treasure trove of documents in David Pecker's office relating to information assembled from all these catch and kill operations against people who potentially had damaging information on the president. You also mentioned that the president was very concerned about the whereabouts of these documents and who possessed them. Does that treasure trove of documents still exist?
I don't know. I had asked David Pecker for them.
So you would say the person who knows the whereabouts of these documents would be David Pecker?
David Pecker, Barry Levine, or Dylan Howard.
Okay, thank you. Secondly, I want to ask a little bit about your conversation with my colleague from Missouri about asset inflation. To your knowledge, did the president ever provide inflated assets to an insurance company?
Yes.
Who else knows that the president did this?
Alan Weisselberg, Ron Lieberman, and Matthew Calamari.
And where would the committee find more information on this? Do you think we need to review his financial statements and his tax returns in order to compare them?
Yes, and you'd find it at the Trump org.
Mr. Cohen, I want to ask you about your assertion that the president may have improperly devalued his assets to avoid paying taxes. According to an August 21st, 2016 report by the Washington Post, while the president claimed in financial disclosure forms that Trump National Golf Club in Jupiter, Florida, was worth more than $50 million, he had reported otherwise to local tax authorities that the course was worth, quote, no more than $5 million. Mr. Cohen, do you know whether this specific report is accurate?
It's identical to what he did at Trump National Golf Club at Briarcliff Manor.
Do you know, to your knowledge, was the president interested in reducing his local real estate bills, tax bills?
Yes.
And how did he do that?
What you do is you deflate the value of the asset, and then you put in a request to the tax department for a deduction.
Thank you. Now, in October 2018, the New York Times revealed that, quote, President Trump participated in dubious tax schemes during the 1990s, including instances of outright fraud that greatly increased the fortune he received from his parents. And it further stated from Mr. Trump, quote, he also helped formulate a strategy to undervalue his parents' real estate holdings by hundreds of millions of dollars on tax returns, sharply reducing his tax bill when those properties were transferred to him and his siblings. Mr. Cohen, do you know whether that specific report is accurate?
I don't. I wasn't there in 1990s.
Who would know the answer to those questions?
Alan Weisselberg.
And would it help for the committee to obtain federal and state tax returns from the president and his company to address that discrepancy?
I believe so.
So that's New York Congressmember Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez questioning Michael Cohen. The significance of what she was asking, Marcy Wheeler.
Well, it's one of those examples that I talked about where there's evidence of other kinds of criminal activity that didn't make the headline, didn't make Michael Cohen's opening statement. And in this case, AOC kind of laid the groundwork for this committee or any other congressional committees to get his tax returns, to get the tax records from these golf courses, to get, to pull in AMI, National Enquirer, to ask whether there's compromising information that they've held out over Donald Trump. And so in 5 minutes, this freshman congresswoman just laid out a whole investigative plan for 3 more topics into Donald Trump's potentially criminal activities.
And this issue of the treasure trove and the safe over at National Enquirer, at AMI, the parent company, what is in this, and David Pecker's knowledge about what exactly Trump was concerned about and who has this treasure trove right now?
Right. The term is catch and kill. So for years, any time some embarrassing or scandalous story would sort of float out there about Donald Trump's conduct, National Enquirer would hear about it or often get offered the story, and then they would get the person's story rights, pay for them, and basically kill the story. And they had done that with a couple of the accusations of affairs, but we would assume that the stories are similar kinds of things, accusations of affairs. There was the love child story that was one of those. And
that he said was
those
false.
Stories would of Trump potentially fathering a child with one of the staffers. That
Michael Cohen said
building.
they said was false.
Right. He said he never found that story. Those are the kinds of stories, though,
but they
that
paid $15,000
would...
to kill it anyway.
Right. Right. Sure. It was the election season. And a lot of people have noted that one wasn't named in his charging documents as one of the hush money stories. But nevertheless, there's all these stories. National Enquirer's been doing this for years, and it is a legitimate story about where those stories currently are, where they legally are, and whether National Enquirer has any kind of leverage over the president because they've got all his secrets.
You know, race was an undercurrent of this whole hearing. You had, of course, Michael Cohen starting off by calling President Trump a racist. I want to turn to North Carolina Republican Congressmember Mark Meadows, who heads up the Freedom Caucus, who introduced Department of Housing and Urban Development appointee Lynn Patton, an African-American woman, in an attempt to disprove Cohen's claims that Donald Trump is a racist.
Mr. Cohen, do you know Lynn Patton? I'm right here.
Oh, yes, sir.
Do you know Lynn Patton?
Yes, I do.
I asked Lynn to come today in her personal capacity to actually shed some light. How long have you known Ms. Patton?
I'm responsible for Lynn Patton joining the Trump Organization and the job that she currently holds.
Well, I'm glad you acknowledge that, because you made some very demeaning comments about the president that Ms. Patton doesn't agree with. In fact, it has to do with your claim of racism. She says that as a daughter of a man born in Birmingham, Alabama, that there is no way that she would work for an individual who was racist. How do you reconcile the two of those, Mr.
As neither should I, as the son of a Holocaust survivor.
But, Mr. Cohen, I guess what I'm saying is I've talked to the president over 300 times. I've not heard one time a racist comment out of his mouth in private. So how do you reconcile it? Do you have proof of those conversations?
Well, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib of Michigan later responded to Congressman Meadows.
Just to make a note, Mr. Chairman, just because someone has a person of color, a black person working for them, does not mean they aren't racist. And it is insensitive that some would even say it's the fact that someone would actually use a prop, a black woman, in this chamber, in this committee, is alone racist in itself.
Well, since yesterday's hearing, a video has resurfaced of North Carolina Republican Congressmember Mark Meadows making a racist joke about President Obama in 2012.
Good to be here with you today. I thank you so much for allowing me just a few minutes to talk with you and share a few things. But, you know, it's interesting when the more we find out, the more we realize how wrong the direction we're going. And so what we're going to do is take back our country. 2012 is the time that we're going to send Mr. Obama home to Kenya or wherever it is. We're going to do it.
Send Obama home to Kenya or wherever it is. Marcy Wheeler.
Right, and there was a big to-do at the end of the hearing about whether or not Congresswoman Tlaib had stepped over bounds, over congressional rules on insulting a colleague. But right, I mean,
and Elijah Cummings
Meadows
said something very interesting, who is the chair of the House Oversight Committee. He said, people may not know, but Mark Meadows is, he said, actually my best friend.
That was one of the craziest pieces of news out of the entire hearing. I admit, I think people are puzzling through that. And another thing that Meadows did at the end of the hearing was Cummings had said, hold off on submitting all these articles until we're done. There were just a few members of Congress left. One was AOC, one was Congresswoman Presley, and one was Congresswoman Tlaib. And so you had three women of color waiting for their turns, having waited all day. And Mark Meadows didn't follow Cummings's request and basically tried to stall Tlaib just minutes before she said that was a racist act. And then he, threw a tissy fit. It
was amazing. Ayanna Pressley called out the racism, the freshman congresswoman, first African-American congresswoman to represent Massachusetts. You had Brenda Lawrence, also of Detroit and Michigan, talking about the racism of President Trump.
Right, and Cohen said one of the reasons he started thinking differently about Trump was Charlottesville. So, and I think his response was right on. I think Meadows that was an example where Meadows and the president's defenders really didn't expect Cohen to be as sharp as he was. But yeah, he is the child of a Holocaust survivor, and that too should make it beyond the pale, beyond common rationality to work for Trump for so many years while he coddled these racists.
I want to go to...
I don't think any... Go ahead.
I want to go to Representative Ro Khanna of California questioning Michael Cohen about a check payment he received from the Trump Revocable Trust.
As federal prosecutors laid out in their criminal charges, payments like this check resulted in numerous false statements in the books and records of the Trump Organization. And it's important for the American public to understand this. Nothing to do with collusion. This is financial fraud, garden variety financial fraud. It was disguised as a payment for legal services to you. But this was not a payment for legal services, was it, Mr. Cohen?
No, sir.
You told Representative Kelly that the president was aware of this scheme. Is that correct?
That's correct.
I just want the American public to understand the explosive nature of your testimony in this document. Are you telling us, Mr. Cohen, that the president directed transactions in conspiracy with Alan Weisselberg and his son, Donald Trump Jr., as part of a criminal conspiracy of financial fraud? Is that your testimony today?
Yes.
I also want to go to an exchange between Michael Cohen and California Democrat Harley Ruda.
Over the years, President Trump was asked how many times he interacted with convicted Russian mobster Felix Sater. In 2013, President Trump testified that, quote, "Not many. If he were sitting in the room right now, I really wouldn't know what he looked like," unquote. Mr. Cohen, as you previously testified, isn't it true that President Trump knew convicted Russian mobster Felix Sater in 2013 when he made that statement?
Yes.
Isn't it true that because of Mr. Sater's relationship to the Trump Organization, that he had an office in the Trump Tower?
And on the 26th floor, Mr. Trump.
And the 26th floor is important. Why?
Because it's Mr. Trump's floor.
So he had an office on the same floor as President Trump.
In fact, his office, when he left, became my office.
And isn't it also true that convicted Russian mobster Sater even had business cards indicating that he was a senior advisor to Donald Trump, as reported by the Washington Post?
Yes.
Did convicted Russian mobster Sater pay rent for his office?
No, he did not.
So, based on those facts, isn't it true that President Trump misled at best, or worse, lied under oath?
Yes.
Harley Ruda questioning Michael Cohen. 10 seconds. Marcy Wheeler, the significance of this.
Sater was the guy who was brokering the Trump Tower deal all through the election, and Trump made similar comments during the election about not knowing Felix Sater, when, in fact, he was negotiating a $300 million real estate deal through Sater to the two Russians.
Finally, Elijah Cummings at the end of the hearing.
Believe that the president committed a crime while in office?
Based on what, looking at the checks and listening to Mr. Cohen, it appears that he did.
It appears that he committed a crime, said the House Committee Chair, Elijah Cummings. That does it for our coverage today. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks so much for joining us.